Welcome back to the Marketing Madmen on Extra 106.3. With me, I have a young Tom Glavin. At least that's according to Flounder, our producer, who looked through the glass and said that. Now, I don't know if he has a curveball, but I do know that our real guest, Freddy Carmichael, was an NCAA golfer, and I actually got to see that in action out at the Ritz-Carlton. So, Freddie, let's segue a little bit. Let's have some fun. Talk about playing golf. Talk about, my understanding is you wanted a basketball scholarship, and you realized that you were not 6'11" or black, so we went with a golf scholarship. So talk a little bit about how that happened, because I have to imagine that even playing golf and the discipline and what it takes to be an individual sport has helped with a lot of things in life. So talk about golf, talk about college.
Well, point of clarification, though, it was NCAA, so it was junior college. But look, it was, you're right.
Bro, you're still one of the best in the world. You're still in the top 2% in the world, and light years better than I will ever be. So I'll call a spade and give you the credit where it's deserved.
Well, I will say this. Yeah, my father introduced me to the game, and he didn't know anything about golf. But you're right. I played all sports growing up, and several different parts. I may have wanted to be a Tom Glavin, or I may have wanted to certainly be like an Isaiah Thomas playing basketball. I was a gym rat. My dad was a basketball coach, and that's all I wanted to do. But I took the junior college scholarship to play golf with the full intent that I was going to play on their basketball team. And I didn't really. I think I had like natural given ability to hit the ball. I never fully loved the game. I loved to compete. I didn't love to practice, and in golf, that's something that you have to devote to it. But yeah, about the first semester, I realized I was not going to make the team. My whole plan to try to get on and let me at least get fouled and shoot free throws didn't work out. And they were top 5 in the country at the time. But the golf team had finished second in the nation my senior year in high school. And so finally it hit me like, look, I'm good at this. If I really kind of focus on it, then I feel like I can do a good job and represent my junior college, Meridian Community College, where my father had played on their first baseball team, coincidentally. But yeah, it was a great experience. I focused hard that sophomore year, barely made it into regionals, and then I had to win in 3 playoff holes to make it to the national championship.
That's the competitiveness. That's the competitiveness.
Oh, yeah,
the training means nothing. That's the competitiveness.
Yeah. But I don't know how good I was. I probably finished 50th in the country that year, but it was such a great experience. And you're right, golf. My dad told me that the reason that I should play is that it was a game that I could play the rest of my life, and it would help me in business, which I thought was crazy at the time. Yeah. And I remember getting in newspapers, and there was a room. We were at Ross Bridge in Birmingham, which is a great golf course over there. And there were about 80 editors in the room. And the guy said, who wants to play golf at Ross Bridge? And so I was one of like 5. I mean, newspaper people just didn't play golf. So I get out there, and I had not played in probably 2 or 3 years.
But the muscle memory's there.
Broke 80. I think I broke 80. The guy thought I was a pro. And again, from that point forward,
doors were just opening.
They remembered me, and I remember calling my dad and saying, you were right. Like, this game has so much power. And look, I love all sports. I don't play golf as much as I used to, but even like when we went out and played, it's you still enjoy it. But I definitely still love to compete.
Yeah, I will tell you, to make you feel better about not playing basketball, I will tell you my collegiate basketball story, because it's way more embarrassing than what yours is. So I was a freshman at the University of Maryland, and I had a buddy who was trying to play on the team. And I didn't have the nerve to tell him you have no chance of making the team, so I trained with him. And I was running, and I mean, I partied quite a bit in college, but I was running 6-minute miles. We were in shape, and this dude was not going to go to tryout. So I lost on him. I'm like, you're going. He's like, I don't want to go. I'm like, you're going. He goes, you have to come with me. So I tried out for the Maryland men's basketball team. Mind you, this is 2000. They won the national championship in 2003. Gary Williams was the coach. Gary Williams was leading the tryout. I was the worst player. It wasn't even close on this court. And I can play some ball. So I finally, I don't get a basket. I'm just the worst player. I finally get a layup, and I'm going to take a layup, and I think I'm Jordan, tongue out. Someone comes underneath me, hits me under the chin. I bit a hole straight through my tongue, and I had bled through to my socks in 6 seconds. And that's Gary Williams looks at me, because everyone's like, I have blood. And he goes, son, are you in or you out? I'm like, in. Finished the whole tryout with blood dripping through my socks. I finished the tryout. So my story is way more embarrassing. I had to go to the infirmary to get stitches in my tongue to this day. Still have not fixed. I have a hole in my tongue from that. But that's just make you feel more comfortable now with your story.
That's actually a good story. It's like, hey,
I tried.
You it out. Today's generation would not do that.
Today's generation's coaches would not be allowed to let a kid bleeding through the floor stay on the court. Like, it's unbelievable that even happened. But so now, Father of 3 kids. So your kids are in sports. So before we go to the business side, my daughter's 6, my son is 3. They're just getting to that phase of their life. So I see a lot of parents that take this very seriously, that have their kids doing travel 6 days a week. As a person, as a business community leader in this, what advice do you have? What are you doing with your kids? What do you advise other people about their kids? Because I think your upbringing and what you learn gives a little bit more clarity than what most people think. What are you telling your kids now?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing is, and I think Chipper Jones made a comment about this fairly recently that made me, I actually shared it with a lot of folks, is you play the sport that you want to play in that season. Like, have fun with it. I think the specialization in sports is taken over, and it's really the adults, not the kids. The kids don't want to specialize. And look, on a
you
certain
specialize
level,
in junior year of high school. If you really want to specialize, it's junior year of high school when you really know you can be something. Otherwise,
but they're gonna get to your kids 6, 7 years old and start to, which again, it's ridiculous to even have those conversations before you hit puberty. I mean, there's so much development that happens even there. But no, I think I told my kids, whatever you want to play it. I told you my youngest, my 11-year-old is now playing lacrosse, which you know all about.
Yeah.
I know nothing about.
It's a good sport for kids, man.
And
you learn a lot. You're playing with a team, but the most important thing, that hand-eye coordination, is unlike any other sport that you can do. To cradle a stick when someone's whacking away at you, the discipline for that is unbelievable.
Yeah, but again, play all of them, because even today, in my mid-40s now, there is something that I take from a Little League baseball game or something from my high school basketball. I think about everything of who I became as a person in those formative years on playing team sports, and they're all different. You learn, golf, you're kind of on an island, but you're a part of a team. You learn so much throughout around. Baseball, so again, let's
take the mental, the skill sets are so different, right? The lateral movement that comes along with basketball, the just straight running that comes from soccer, right? The explosiveness of football. I mean, when you're trying to make an athlete, the ideal athlete would have a little bit of all of those things.
Yeah.
That's where I think the flaw is, right? So my only advice, my daughter's 6. She was 5 when she started playing soccer, really started playing. And my only thing was, I had watched nieces and nephews grow up, and if the girls especially are afraid to get hit, they cannot be athletes if they're afraid of contact. So I told my little daughter, I'm like, look, I'm not saying to hit people for no reason, but I'm saying when that ball's around you, you lower your shoulder and you go in. I don't care how big the girl is. And my daughter is a heat-seeking missile. She's little, and she will and the coach is like, I've never seen anything like it. And the reason I told her that is because let's not talk about what you're going to be right now. In the future, if you're afraid of contact, you can't play sports.
Yeah.
Any sport. Like, you can play golf, right? But I'm saying you can't play baseball, basketball, football if you're afraid to get hit or if you're afraid of the ball. So I tried to get that out of the way early. Other than that, what she plays, if she wants to do ballet, do you know how much we were trained when we were young? Hit the gym, go do workout. You know what we should have been trained? Pilates, and how to be flexible and have movement. We were trained the wrong thing. So now, ballet, telling a kid to play ballet is not going to negatively affect her soccer career. That's probably the best thing that she can do.
Yeah. Yeah, well, look, there, and again, I just go back to, there's so many different things that all those different sports teach you. And so when you start this whole specialization path, then you are robbing kids of those opportunities. And maybe they're going to be the best baseball player ever, but there's something they're going to learn in football or something they're going to learn in track.
And their habits change. You just said puberty. Right? What if all of a sudden at puberty, these kids grow up and are spastic because they grew up in their 13s they can't move as well? What if they grow up and they become these stud athletes that grew? I mean, Shaq grew to 7'1" when he was like 22 years old. You have and I'm always told, especially baseball, but you could be the best baseball player. You don't know until you can throw or catch an off-speed pitch or a curveball. Sure. You have no idea what you are. So I agree with you. I think it's a shame, but I think you can provide some context. 1, because your dad was a coach. 2, your dad was a collegiate baseball player in the beginning, and then 3, you had the collegiate experience. So I think you have a little bit more context than most do. I was supposed to, my goal was to walk on at Maryland. It was #1 school in the country. I got scholarships for Albany and a couple other D3 schools. My goal was I would walk on at Maryland. I joined a fraternity 2 days later, and everything's been downhill since there. So I don't have that same, was I a good athlete? Pretty damn good athlete. But I think that pedigree you have, and I hope people heed the advice. Like, guys, I don't want to do this, but I'm going to do it anyway. It's like marketing, guys. You got to diversify what you do. If you think these days of specializing are over, if you don't have a diversity in what you approach in business, the world just doesn't work that way anymore. There's not time for specialization anymore. And if there is, it's when you've already established the fundamentals of everything else. So let's take that very natural transition, and now let's talk a little bit of marketing.
Yeah.
So you grew up as a journalist, which
Yeah.
is really means you were, when you talk about knowing the old school mediums, journalism is an old school media. And if you want my honest opinion, it is dead. Social media has killed it. There's no one writing a story actually for the intent of getting stories out there. They're writing stories for corporate overgods, or they're writing stories for the reason. So talk about a little bit of how you've seen the transition from that old school method of journalism to nowadays, where we are in a fractured marketing community like no other.
Yeah, it's fascinating for me because I came along at a time where the convergence of media was happening, which again for me was cool because I was a broadcast major,
Sure.
and so
The stories were great. What you were talking about,
Yeah. If you want to, I can now use multimedia. We were doing podcasts before they were cool.
They're still not cool.
It depends. Don't sell yourself too short.
Depends.
Better marketing.
Fair.
But I think that, that part of it was exciting to see. But I started to see sort of the slow death of print. Now, I still think there are applications.
It's got more niche.
Community journalism is still important.
I agree.
Absolutely. And I think there is a strong role for newspapers to play in that. But what happened, you're right, is when social media came along, I mean, I was in newspapers when I was pushing for us to start a YouTube channel and pushing for us to do Facebook and all of those things without thinking through the revenue application of it. How are you going to make money off of it? And so just what has happened in the past 20 years, I made this comment the other day that when I was a journalist, a print journalist, I would have never wanted. You see articles now that are brought to you by a certain organization, and they ask you.
It waters it down on them immediately.
Right, and so now you have people who have to be discerning about the information that they're getting, even in what they would consider traditional news. They have to question, or not maybe question, but just they have to use some discernment and see who is behind the article, who's paying for the reporter's salary. That would have been hard for me to stomach as a true journalist. And so,
but I also think the way it used to be, a headline was to entice you to read the article. Now a headline is to grab your attention, and then the facts are tucked so far away in the article that you don't even read them, that you're taking everything out of context.
It's the headline. It's all about the clicks, and again, a lot of that is, you see the analytics all the time. I mean, people's attention spans are so short now. And so long form journalism, and again, I would say podcast is an area. Radio in particular is an area where long form journalism still.
It reigns supreme, dude. You have no. I mean, you're talking. Our app will get 28 to 40 minutes every time someone opens our app. Do you know what the average time someone in the app is? 30 seconds, 40 seconds. Our stream is doing 56 minutes every time someone opens a session. And what I tell people all the time, we are fascinated with content right now. Everybody wants to make content, okay? So all these people are spending all this money to make these videos because they think they have to make content. The problem is, who is going to watch your video? Nobody. Radio has a captive audience of 20,000, and you know are listening for 50 minutes a time. Story tell better in your methods that are reaching people. I think you're right. It's broken. I think when it comes to articles, you look at a recipe and all I want is the recipe. But there's 64 pages of the story of how the third albino cousin of this person wrote a recipe and found it in a mountain, and that's why they have a recipe. I'm not looking for I'm looking for the recipe. You're right, because they're trying to trick you into spending more time with it, so they have glamour mediums, when meanwhile all you're trying to do is find the recipe. You're not reading any of that stuff. It's all fluff.
Yeah. And again, it has just changed so dramatically. And I even look back in the early 2000s when I was in newspapers. And again, I love newspapers, and I still love the idea of the fourth estate and, for accountability standpoint. I just think that the erosion started to happen when the business side couldn't figure out how to monetize it. And so then what ends up happening slowly over time, those lines start to get blurred. So it's no longer, it used to be, was it an opinion piece versus a news piece? And now I think that people are just distrustable in nature anyway. So you got short attention spans, like dwindling attention spans, then the trust aspect to go in there, and it just muddies the water.
Yeah, and again, I think it's also, you wrote newspapers for the masses, right? Because if even you didn't agree in part of it and you didn't want to read politics, there was the sports there. There was everyone who was reading a newspaper. Now, we've been so segregated that you're speaking to the sides of the bell curve as opposed to the middle. So you have to be super liberal, or have to be super progressive, or you have to be neighborhood, or you have to be this. We've made it niche, which means you're never going to make the money because the money is with the masses. So I think that was one of the things. I also think that the newspaper industry got so fat and happy for so long wrong. These guys were just cashing checks and checks that they didn't want to see the change coming, and they purposely chose to because realistically, most of the people, they made their money. Right, to some way or another, they made their money, which is why we just left it open for. I mean, Facebook's intention was to kick newspapers out years before it started happening. To be in the journal. Now, that being said, every person has an opinion. You were a journalist. You took pride in being a journalist. You went through school. You went through experience. You were out in the field. You probably took crap jobs first, taking stories to get your. Right now, you can write an article with zero experience. Actually, you could have AI write an article. Say, I want to be sensationalist and I want headlines. Here's what I got to write. Write it. Slap your name on it, and they will print it as an actual journalism article.
No doubt.
Which is broken.
Yeah,
there's no one to trust. There's no trust there. And ironically, you bring up trust. The irony is they don't trust social media. They trust social media less than they do the newspapers. So we've sat here, and if I'm the government, I'm pissed off because now they don't trust their senators or anybody because of the stories are being spun. So who do you trust? When you talk about marketing, what is your advice to people? Because you're in an industry where you're feeling that more than anybody. Well, the stories are crazy that you're seeing.
Yeah, I think you just kind of back to where we started originally on this. And
that's what I meant to be. I meant to go full circle, of course.
Yeah, exactly. But you're looking, when you sort of look back and you kind of, not being reactive, right? So in the very beginning, when we were talking about Vogtle, like, hey, just focus on telling the story and not all the headwinds, so to speak. And so I think the same thing, with this is you just have to have focus. And at the end of the day, focus should be on transparency. The more vulnerable and transparent you are, that becomes as authentic. That's what people are starved for. So is that authentic side.
I love it. I'm going to add one thing, and I'm bringing it back to golf. So golf needs two things. It needs focus and discipline. You need to be focused, and you need to be disciplined. You cannot go off path because some person screams at you to go off path. You have to be focused and disciplined. And if you are focused and disciplined, I still think that there is medium out there, and I think people will slowly gravitate back. We're seeing it. We're seeing it with what's going on with Bally's now. You know what? People don't watch it on TV. You know what they want to listen to? They listen to it on the radio. And they have the nostalgia coming. Like, you know what? This is not that bad. Do I really want to watch 162 games on television for 3 hours a night if I could have my headphones in and clean the kitchen, do all this stuff? So I am certainly seeing a resurgence of these mediums. I'm seeing people put their phones down. One of the best parts about going out and playing golf really is 4 hours your way, that phone is tucked away. The Masters, it was the best part about the Masters was not having a phone. And the time went so fast. We're afraid that if we're not busy, time will go slow, right? But not being busy made time in the Masters, it felt like 10 minutes. I was there for 6 hours. So I completely agree with you. What advice do you give marketers or people that are trying to come up in this space about how to really cut through the clutter and how to get messaging out there that resonates with people?
Well, I think people have to do the hard work. You have to get to know what it is you're
You already
doing.
Lost half the audience. Hard work? What?
Do the
hard work.
There are no shortcuts to this. And, look, back in the day as a journalist, I had to do things like manually go into the jail cells, like the holding cells, and write down the names of the people who got arrested as they are screaming at me behind, like giving me death threats, behind, I'm going to come out and find you and all that kind of stuff. Now look, now technology has allowed us to be able to get those type of reports, but that taught me something, right? And so I think that I tell our team all the time, like to be able to communicate about our business, you got to get out and learn the business, and you have to constantly be a student of the business, and this is not a goal that you are ever going to attain. This is something you are going to chase throughout your career. And so you should be
happy with that. You should be the thrill of the hunt, and that's the competitiveness. Like, you should never think you're there and you've reached it, because if you do, you're just going to become complacent.
But there are no shortcuts, and I think sometimes in AI, I think AI is an incredible tool. It's something that we have to figure out a way to use and interact with, just like we have everything else. I don't view it any differently than anything else that's
It's the assembly line, man. It's any of these technology, industrial revolution, any of these things. They've all been huge changes that were going to change the world. All that changes was our job sets and our skill sets. We're pretty resilient people.
But you can't use that to shortcut knowledge. And I think that people sometimes, my advice again would be, whatever you're doing, whatever industry you're in, whatever, if you're product marketing or whatever, get to know the people that designed it. Why did they design it? What was behind it? What were they trying to accomplish?
That's where the passion lies.
That's how you start to find those stories. And I think that's sort of one of the things that I see that's lost today. Everybody's looking to, how can I duplicate the success of this video on Facebook or whatever?
The sense of the concept of virality exists, so you cannot duplicate it. Because if you were able to duplicate it, then it wouldn't be viral, because everyone would just have that same content in front of them. I also think it's ironic when you say about the contact, like, you can't contact Google. There's no way to get a human being on the phone. You don't go out and meet people about in the streets that are doing it. They have no connection to their communities whatsoever. They are in their ivory castles. One of the things I love about radio, man, I am everywhere. I host a show. I've had now 90 episodes. I've met 90 people, just the most random things. There's no connection that Google has to the communities it serves whatsoever, and they want it that way. Facebook, even worse. There's no connection. There's no one to talk to that can walk you through a problem. There are plenty of people that'll take your orders and get you to spend more money, but there's nobody. Do you know how many calls a week we get from people calling sales and asking about the radio station, and they want to advertise, and the poor people, they have $500, and you have to explain to them, guys, save it, please. It's not the right medium, but they're interested. They want to talk to you. Yeah. Those things don't exist. Even the old newspapers, the editors, they would be on the phone, the journalists, they would be there. They would be in the public's eye talking to them in jail cells. The disconnect between people and the communities is just getting greater. And if my advice is, I'm not going to give the old-fashioned get your hands dirty, but my advice is just listen to people. Whether or not the stories are things you want to hear, listen, because perspective is really important, and we are lacking perspective, and you need to market by having perspective, but also seeing other sides. Because how many times have you looked at your life and said, oh my God, this company, this website is atrocious, it's the worst company, $30 million company. And how many times have you looked at a company with the most flashy website, $1 million company? Yeah. We are built in this world to put a facade on of all this stuff, right? Like, I run a sales department. I pretend to be a marketing host. Like, we all put on this facade. But for me, the experience is really important. So I think it was a great segment. What advice would you go back and give your past self? So what advice would you give to yourself when you were 12 years old, 13 years old, about the future? What advice would you give? We got about a minute and a half. I know you didn't expect this one coming.
I don't know. The only thing that comes to mind is my dad had this saying where he was always like, look, son, you may not always be the fastest, the smartest, whatever, but you better not let anybody outwork you. Like, that was his thing, is you're not always going to be the best at everything you do. Sometimes you may be average, below average, but just make sure you outwork the other person. And so that advice, I didn't listen to at age 12. It became real to me.
It sounds like you got more of it than you thought you did.
I did.
But you didn't listen directly.
But if I could go back, I would be like, listen to what your mom is telling you about this part. Listen to what your dad is telling you about this part. And maybe that's because right now I'm trying to convince. I've got a 19-year-old who probably listens to me much more now than she ever did before. And my 11 and 13-year-old, they think I'm an idiot half the time.
Well, puberty will do that, especially that 13-year-old. That's gonna get into that wacky phase. Dude, I would follow that suit, and I would just say, I want everyone to work hard, but don't work too hard at that one thing that you're distracted from the other things. Take on tasks, build with your hands, learn. Don't just be stuck in a book. Learn the other side of it. See the street smarts, because it's that specialization. Yeah, you could be really good, but the chances are there's going to be somebody that's equally or better than you. But you know what? If you're good at this, but you're also good at this, learn creative, be a musician. Don't just be a athlete. Do these things. I think that's the best advice anyone could give. So on that note, we'll end this segment. You listen to The Marketing Amendment on Extra 106.3, and we'll be right back.